There's a massive rumor circulating right now about the SSC GD 2026 exam, and everyone is chasing it. The story? Cutoffs are expected to drop. The core theory behind this is that the competition level is finally balancing out, which would naturally pull the required selection scores down. This creates a serious dilemma if you're currently preparing. If the barrier to entry is going to be lower, can you safely reduce the intensity of your study schedule? The promise of an easier path to selection sounds incredibly appealing, but we are looking at early predictive models right now, not actual exam results. When you treat fluid, unofficial estimations as guaranteed safety nets, you fall into a very specific psychological trap. You start negotiating with your own effort. Inputting these lower predictions into your head as strict goals breeds complacency, hitting you right when you need to be building momentum in your mock exams. Treating internet hype as absolute fact is the kind of error that leaves a candidate missing the selection list by a single, devastating mark. To actually use these projected numbers without sabotaging your prep, we need to look at them as current market conditions, not promises. Historical cutoffs are rigid, hard data points. These 2026 expectations are highly fluid estimates based entirely on present trends. Plotting historical cutoffs against 2026 expectations, we aren't looking at two solid walls. We're comparing a fixed benchmark against a fluctuating target. For the general category, the prediction isn't a single number. It's a 5-mark window between 130 and 135. That gap represents pure uncertainty. This data exists to give you context on where the competition might land. It is entirely useless if you use it as an excuse to relax your personal standards. Let's break down exactly what these estimated score ranges look like across the board. This table maps the expected score ranges across the 5 major categories based on the current analysis. The general category sits right at that baseline we just mentioned, projecting a window of 130 to 135 marks. The OBC projections start 5 marks lower, at 125, but share an identical peak, topping out at that 135-mark limit. The SC category drops into a projected 115 to 125 window, while ST estimates sit slightly lower, around 110 to 120. If you look at your specific category and decide to make the absolute lowest number your target for mock tests, you are making a massive gamble. Optimizing your daily study routine for the bare minimum leaves you zero margin for error. If the exam difficulty spikes unexpectedly, that strategy instantly collapses. But there is a specific anomaly hidden inside these projections that proves you cannot afford to coast. When we isolate and compare the general upper limit against the EWS category's upper limit, the easy year narrative falls apart. The EWS upper bound is actually projected at 138. That is 3 marks higher than the absolute peak of the general category. This data point tells us that internal competition within subcategories is getting significantly tighter, not relaxing. Candidates who rely on historical category buffers to save them are trading actual preparation for a false sense of security. If you aren't pushing for general-level intensity in your mocks, you are at risk. There is also a paradox at play here. The very news of a potential low cutoff actively pulls thousands of previously demoralized candidates back into the testing pool. The expectation of an easier selection ironically drives overall competition straight back up, simply because more people show up believing they have a real shot. 2 candidates can look at this exact same set of 2026 data and get entirely different results based entirely on how they process it. We are seeing 3 distinct mindsets emerge as these predictions spread across study groups. The naive beginner hears 130 marks and uses it to justify weak foundational study habits, assuming the test will bend to their lower effort level. The anxious repeater does the opposite. They fixate on the projected numbers, desperately searching for a safety net, which only paralyzes their daily progress. It is your psychological reaction to these predictions, rather than the numbers themselves, that will ultimately dictate your performance on exam day. So, how do we correctly utilize this data without falling into either of those mental traps? We can map test scores against strategy adjustments. Beginners, ignore the 130 prediction. Plot a target of 140 plus to avoid wasting this attempt. Repeaters, use your category range for baseline calibration. Treat it as a stress-free floor, rather than a hard ceiling. Once you consistently hit that 135 mark baseline in your mocks, It requires extreme self-discipline to keep pushing that score upward, instead of simply coasting. The predictive numbers on your screen will continually change, but the core requirement for relentless, driving effort will not. The only true way to capitalize on a year with a potentially lower cutoff is to prepare exactly as if you are facing the highest cutoff in history.